Buoyancy control and proper weighting are the hardest, and yet the most foundational skills for getting started in scuba diving. Many diving agencies simply do not put enough time into this during open water certification. This leaves most divers needing specialized courses or personal training later just to feel comfortable in the water. And because few divers get the extra training, poor buoyancy remains a major barrier to diving safely, efficiently, and stylishly. In this video, we are going to break down the top 6 buoyancy mistakes that are likely ruining your dives. We want to highlight these now so you can pay attention to them and correct them on your very next dive. I'm Don, and I know these struggles all too well. I have made every single one of these mistakes during my diving before. In fact, it almost turned me away from diving entirely until I finally learned to feel truly weightless. And I want you to feel that same weightlessness, effortlessness, and total control without having to learn the hard way. And the first place we need to look isn't actually on your back, but it's inside your chest. On every dive, you have a built-in buoyancy compensator that you may not realize has more control than the gear on your back. These are your lungs, at least for open circuit recreational diving. You can vary your displacement by several pounds just by inhaling deeply. You can steer your dive, ascend and descend over small obstacles without ever touching a button. The issue with using your lungs for control is that our primal instinct when we feel unstable is to hold our breath. It feels like a safety mechanism, a way to freeze a moment in time. But in reality, holding your breath traps a large volume of gas that drastically increases your positive buoyancy. Not to mention, it is a massive safety concern as that gas expands and you can damage your lungs if you ascend. But even without injury risk, breath holding triggers a physics issue known as breath lag. And here's how it works. When you inhale, you do not rise instantly because the water resistance and inertia delay the movement. You're accelerating downward from your last breath out. And there's a gap of time between the action and the reaction. New divers often panic during this delay. You inhale to rise over a rock, but nothing happens for 1 to 2 seconds. But your brain says, not enough. And you reach back to dump gas from your buoyancy control device on your back or your BCD. And then you definitely have to breathe out. You let gas out, and then you're finding you're dropping much faster than you want. And so you end up adding gas back into the BCD, and now you have this yo-yo effect if you're doing that the entire dive. And because the BCD is much larger than your lungs, this can cause a massive swing in buoyancy control at a precise level. And suddenly, the physics catches up. And you just end up getting into this exhausting yo-yo of buoyancy control where you're not really controlling your buoyancy, and you're using a lot of gas, basically dumping it and adding it back into your BCD instead of using your lungs to control the precise buoyancy. Your BCD is designed for large depth changes, what we call macro adjustments, and it can compensate for neoprene compression as you go deeper. Your lungs, however, are fine-tuning knobs that handle the rest, the micro precision adjustments. Experienced divers learn to control their major buoyancy changes of 20 feet or 6 meters or more with their BCD. But they control the small increments purely through slow, controlled breathing. The rhythm of your breathing keeps you neutral. As you start to ascend, you should already be breathing out, keeping you flat and stable. If you are ascending, it's good to just keep it at a half lung and always be focusing on breathing a little bit more shallowly, depending on your ascent rate. But the faster you're ascending, which you shouldn't be ascending fast anyways, but the faster you're ascending, the less gas you want in your lungs. But generally, when I am diving, I am able to breathe in and out deeply with a controlled cadence and never worry about descending or ascending too much. You always have this smooth, neutral out cadence. And of course, good trim makes this easier, which we'll get into shortly. And once you stop fighting your lungs, you can finally stop abusing the mechanical one. So this next brings us to the most common habit I see new divers doing. They treat their BCD inflator like a throttle on a video game controller. They are constantly tapping that fill button and then frantically reaching for the dump valve. This creates a dangerous sawtooth profile on your dive computer graph. As we mentioned earlier, the BCD acts like a sledgehammer for buoyancy, when often you only need a scalpel. Every time you add gas to stop a descent, that gas expands the moment you ascend, even just a little bit. That expansion forces you to vent it immediately to stop you from floating to the surface. That can be an endless and exhausting cycle of inflation and deflation. It eats through your gas supply faster than you imagine. This causes significant inefficiency in your dive time and sucks the enjoyment right out of the experience. You are basically paying a gas tax every single time you touch that inflator hose. And it's not much, but it can add up. But there is a physical penalty here as well, beyond just gas consumption. Adding gas to your BCD's wing increases your total volume. This forces you to push more water and move more mass. That extra drag requires significantly more effort to move through the water. This can cause exhaustion, CO2 buildup, or even leg cramps. The goal is always to be as streamlined as possible to slice through the water with the least resistance. The fix for the BCD overuse is a strict set it and forget it mindset. Your BCD has one job: to compensate for your big swings of wetsuit compression. Once you are neutral, take your hand off the inflator. Once you are at that neutral state, just take your hand off the inflator. If you need to rise or fall a few feet or a meter, use your lungs primarily. Relying on breath control stops the big swings of the yo-yo effect. But next, we'll talk about that if you're not dialed in, it's often a likely resort that you might be relying on a physical crutch to stay level. First, if you're enjoying this video, now's a great time to like and subscribe. I post weekly content, help divers grow their skills, build confidence, and explore the ocean with curiosity and care. And I have a free newsletter that will keep you up to date with the latest and greatest of the scuba diving industry that I send out once a month for free. You can find the sign up link in the description, and I'll see you there. You've seen this in action, and I'm sure we've all personally been there too. I call it the window washer phenomenon. Divers sculling furiously with their hands while constantly kicking just to maintain their depth. It looks like they're kind of climbing a ladder, but it's not there. But here's the thing about that movement. If you have to keep moving to stay level, you aren't neutrally buoyant. You are effectively flying underwater, generating lift through that propulsion rather than buoyancy. As soon as you stop moving, you start slowly drifting up or down, making you feel out of control. This behavior creates a massive energy leak in your body. Diving is already a demanding activity, where we burn up to 600 calories just trying to stay warm and get all that nitrogen out. But constant sculling turns that burn rate up significantly, spiking your gas consumption. It drastically shortens your bottom time because your body demands more oxygen to feed those moving muscles. You need to think of yourself less as a helicopter fighting gravity and more like a blimp. Being horizontal and in trim is also not just about looking cool for the camera. It is about minimizing the resistance so you can glide, as well as expanding your body to kind of be in like an air brake in the water column to slow yourself from falling. It'll certainly stabilize your position vertically. To fix and train yourself to get rid of this constant need for sculling is the hover audit. At any time on your next dive, I want you to stop all movement completely and just hover. Try to get into a horizontal trim position. It doesn't need to be perfect, just give it a try. Hold your arms still in front of you. Bend your knees, splay your fins out, and flex that butt. What we are doing here is exactly like a skydiver is using in the air when they're falling, the air brake. We are intentionally breaking your streamlined shape to stop that vertical momentum and lock your depth. This friction helps stabilize you instantly. Of course, to keep your depth, you do have to have neutral buoyancy in your blimp, but you will find the correct posture helps a lot. And you'll have to resist the urge to scull or kick and see how balanced you really are. It might take some time, maybe some gear adjustments if you feel imbalanced. But I use this test every time I get into the water to debug my own buoyancy. If you drift substantially vertical as you breathe, up or down, your buoyancy is probably off. Adjust your BCD's fill until you can hover motionless, and then control everything else via lung. And then have the fine-tuning air brake position with your posture to really lock in your depth. If you're closed in trim, your body comes like the seesaw, and if one side is a little more weight than the other, you have to compensate in strange ways. And it's important to remember that propulsion should always be for fins and strictly for travel, not for just floating or survival. Once you stop flailing, your gas consumption will drop immediately. However, even perfect trim divers can sabotage themselves before they even reach the bottom. This happens due to a specific mental trap that we all fall into. That trap is task fixation. You have a dive plan, but perhaps you see a turtle diving away from you. So you commit to the descent even though you do not actually have control yet. Many divers rationalize that they will fix their buoyancy once they hit the bottom. But underwater chaos can earn compound interest. That extra negative buoyancy from the suit compression creates a runaway train effect, and you will slowly descend faster. Becomes significantly harder to manage than at 20 feet or 6 meters. If you are struggling to stay neutral at 20 feet or 6 meters, you are going to be a dangerous projectile deeper down. Neglecting buoyancy early leads to uncontrolled descents. This is like driving your car downhill without knowing if your brakes work. If something goes wrong, you are moving too fast to fix it. Safety guidelines flag this as a primary cause for ear, barotrauma, and panic. If your descent rate exceeds your ability to equalize or hover, you are effectively falling, not diving. So when you begin to descend, try to only be slightly negative. Instead of like dumping all your gas at the surface, just let enough out that you basically submerge slowly. And then you don't need to let any more gas out because you will start falling faster. So now you put your hand on the inflator button and control your descent. It's a really good idea to stop just below the surface and check on all your buddies and make sure everyone's okay and there's no major issues like bubbles. It's certainly much harder to respond to an issue that's happening towards the surface as a diver's entering the water when you're close to them. And as you continue to descend, you just breathe out and add gas into your BCD frequently to always make sure that descent is controlled. Even better, do controlled stops on the way down. Check your buddies and make sure that no one's having equalization problems or gear issues every step of the way until you get to your desired depth. It's all about having a safe, slow, and importantly, controlled descent. Taking this a step further, adopt a buoyancy first mindset for every task. If you do not have total control of your buoyancy, establish that first. Always. You cannot help someone else if you cannot help yourself. Buoyancy first. You might be taking a picture of a turtle. Buoyancy first. Photo second. If you get this mindset down, all the other skills will become easier in the long run. But once stable, you need to ensure your body position isn't creating a massive physical penalty. We mentioned drag earlier, but body position is more crucial than you probably think. As we mentioned, staying horizontal in trim is not just about looking cool. It gives you the most streamlined position for your body and movement. The alternative that we often see is the seahorse position. This is where your body is in positive trim. Your upside is above your downside where your fins are. So your head is above your fins. And you're basically seahorsing along. This can be caused by weight imbalance in the gear, but often it is because there isn't enough gas in the BCD to hit neutral, so the diver needs constant downward thrust to stay up. Swimming vertically, fins down, heads up, means you're actively fighting basic fluid dynamics. Think of it like a falling leaf that lands on water. If it hits just right, horizontally, at the surface of the water, it'll stay there, and the surface of water will support it staying afloat. If it hits with an edge, it dips into the water and sinks slowly to the bottom. Your body is like that in water. You can have great breath control, but if your trim is bad, you are basically diving as a hydrodynamic brick. To fix this, ensure you have enough gas in your BCD to hit neutral buoyancy before you start moving around. Perform the hover test audit to debug your ability to stay neutral at your depth without moving. If you're staying at your depth but falling out due to trim imbalance, you may have controlled your buoyancy but are hitting other trim issues. I do have another dedicated video that should help you debug specific and more detailed trim issues, and I'm going to go into this video. You can check that out here. But locking in buoyancy is the first big step. Without buoyancy control, perfect trim will be nearly impossible. Another deadly and perhaps the biggest observed error in new divers is a major miscalculation. And the root of that miscalculation is dead weight. Most divers haul around too much lead as a security blanket, whether it is taught to them to take that too much or they just never learn how to properly weight themselves. They think it makes them safer, better down than up, but it is actually sabotaging you. Carrying extra lead forces you to put a massive gas bubble into your BCD just to stay neutral. And as we discussed, that giant bubble creates immense drag. Worse, it expands rapidly when you ascend, making depth control a nightmare. This is a direct physical tax on your dive. To fix this, it's a little bit more nuanced than I can go into this video. So I do have a dedicated video that you can watch up here that will go into more extreme detail. You can check it out next. But for now, in this video, I want to make sure that you have proper weighting at two critical moments, the start and the end. The first is the pre-dive weight check. While in the water with your gear on and an empty BCD, take a full breath. You should float at high level without kicking. You should only submerge when you start to exhale. And this, to me, is one of the most critical pre-dive safety checks that you do when you have an unknown configuration, because most divers have too much weight, and that is a bane to new divers. Believe me, I was there. I know. If you cannot stay afloat with a full lung of air, you are too heavy. The second part of this safety check happens at the stop, your safety stop. Your gas cylinder becomes lighter as you breathe it down. An aluminum tank can actually become positively buoyant when you're empty. This can cause you to float up uncontrollably at the end of a dive. So with a near empty cylinder at roughly 50 bar or 750 psi, you need to do that second weight check at the end of the dive. Or you can go down, if you're cool with it, just burn a cylinder right after doing your first check. You should have just enough weight to stay neutral and perform a hover test around 10 feet or 3 meters. If you can hold that stop comfortably with an empty tank without sculling or finning and do the hover check, your weighting is perfect. Along the way, debugging these 6 buoyancy issues, we've picked up numerous tools, and practice makes perfect. We are all working on improving something, and buoyancy is one of those most foundational skills that there are. So what buoyancy issues are you currently struggling with? Or what tips helped you master buoyancy? I'd love to know in the comments below. As I mentioned in this video, if you're looking to improve your weighting issues, check out this video next. Or if you're looking to correct or improve those trim or balance issues, check out this one next. The more you know, the more you'll love and protect the ocean. Until next time.